Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Cloud First panel with Starbucks, Uber, and Barclays Bank. My name is Fabliha Chowdhury, and I am the Product Marketing Manager for Genetech Stratocast, our cloud-based video management solution. I'm joined today with my co-moderator, Oktay Yildiz, who's the Product Line Manager for Stratocast.
Thank you, Fabliha. Welcome, everyone. We've got an amazing session for you today. We will be hearing from 3 physical security experts from various industries. Whether you're an end user, a system integrator, or a consultant, you should walk away with one of the following 3 things, or even all 3 of them. Number 1, a better insight on the SaaS market and who SaaS is for. Number 2, a better understanding on the customer buying journey, including the decision-making process and some of the internal roadblocks that they may be facing. And 3, how all of us can provide value in the service part of software as a service.
So the roundtable discussion today will last about 60 minutes, of which the first 45 minutes will be dedicated to questions that Oktay and I have prepared for the panel. And the last 10 to 15 minutes, we'd love to open up the virtual floor to the audience and get some audience questions for our panelists. So if you do have any questions throughout the session today, feel free to submit them and we'll do our best to get to them at the end of the session. And with that, I hope you're seated comfortably because you are in for a great session today. We are joined by 3 all-star panelists. We have Tragan Hahn, Director of Physical Security at Starbucks, Joel Hosino, Physical Security Manager for Uber, and Daniel Linecki, who's the Head of Technology for Barclays Bank. So hi, guys. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. How are you guys doing?
Doing well. Thank you.
So to kick things off today, can you guys give us a quick introduction to your organization as well as what your role and responsibilities entail in your organization? So Tragan, let's begin with you, and then we'll follow it through with Joel and then with Daniel.
Thanks, Fab. So I have the physical security functions at Starbucks within the global security team. My team support the security systems, corporate security programs, including executive protection and emergency preparedness, as well as any of our retail physical security programs to include security system deployment, card services, and other things that relate in that space.
Hi, my name is Joel Hosino. I'm the Technical Systems Manager at Uber. I'm responsible for the entire lifecycle of the security technology, from programming, commissioning, maintenance, patching, updating, product engineering, for all of the technology globally throughout Uber. So this applies to our Uber Rides business, any jump facilities that we have, and as we start to scale out the business for transportation, it includes those warehouses and facilities as well.
Hi, everyone. My name is Daniel Linecki. I'm the Head of Technology, Strategy and Plan for Technical Security in Barclays Bank globally. My team and I primarily look after the entire estate, which consists of around 300 corporate offices and around 1,000 retail branches. Majority of our time is spent around evaluating our legacy products, our legacy systems, and looking at improving our space, upgrading our systems, integrating them all, and making sure that we have got as many of those networked and visible remotely. So it's a busy time for us, moving through the life cycle of every product and trying to introduce it into our state in the most secure manner.
So you guys come from all various industries, and despite that, you all have embarked on this journey towards the cloud. So can you take us back to the very beginning of that journey and tell us a little bit more about what triggered your organization to want to move your VMSs to the cloud? So Tragan, let's restart the conversation with you here.
Yeah, thanks. We're still fairly new on our journey of migrating security systems to the cloud. For us, there are a couple of main drivers. One is the availability of our systems. We have a fairly distributed environment supporting a little over 10,000 locations in our security systems today. And we do experience failures, and most of those failures are related to hardware being installed in those locations that we can't always react to fast enough. And so what we want to do is remove some of those failure points from our security technology to be able to create a more available environment. In addition to that, I think, and one of the larger priorities nowadays is making that data available for other things within the business. And what we find is that when we distribute this data out to the edge, it becomes harder to process in a way to provide some of that intelligence that we'd want to. So for us, key goals are reliability and also accessibility of the information.
Mm-hmm. And for you, Daniel, at Barclays, what was the situation that made you guys start to look or consider the cloud?
As we went through evaluating our legacy products, and obviously quite a lot of those were on standalone platforms, it became a challenge to maintain those, just even from a simple logistic perspective, as having to organize teams to be able to go out and run regular maintenance on those equipment, extract data, for investigations or just incident management. So as we started looking at how much effort it takes and, the value that we get out of the legacy systems, we started looking at what other options were available for us. And as we started looking at, on-prem solutions and how much that would cost to upgrade or replace, we started comparing that to cloud platforms. And I think the kind of driver and a decider for us was as well about maintaining the integrity of the security from a cyber perspective, but as well from a manageable perspective. In other words, are the systems able to work on, for example, a NEC platform that we can manage ourselves remotely? So we started looking at a kind of logistical benefits, but as well as a cost comparison of managing the systems moving forward.
Thank you. And for you, Joel, was the situation similar at Uber?
In many of the fronts they were. So when we look at like the information security and the support and maintenance and device failure, it very much was. What differs for Uber, and to give some context here, we have almost 1,000 facilities or locations globally, but less than half of them are protected by physical security technology. One of the major driving factors for us is the lack of availability of internal CorpNet or corporate network at these facilities. So being able to partner with Genetech to deploy a technology that no longer requires corporate network backbone, allowing me to push video straight to the cloud, to do all the same stuff that everyone else is talking about, encrypt the data, protect the data, run analytics against the data, but without that requirement of the corporate network infrastructure. That's one of the big driving forces for us.
That's perfect. So from what we're understanding, you guys all have similar challenges as well as similar needs. For you, Joel, can you tell us a little bit more about some of the isolated sites that you have and why that was particularly a challenge for you guys?
Yeah. We open lines of businesses and new facilities and new regions almost daily. Not these days, but before all of this stuff started spiking up, it was very common for us to get a call on a Thursday and say, we got a new warehouse, we're putting $5 million worth of scooters in it, and we're doing it tomorrow. How quickly can you mobilize to get security technology in place? That was fairly common for us. And without that corporate network backbone, we were dependent on other services, other products, and a lot of times manual guard force to protect these facilities. But with the ability to stream video straight to the cloud, we are now able to put in temporary network connections, stream video, and start protecting these assets very, very quickly.
Perfect. And Oktay, do you want to do a quick summary of question number 1 for the audience?
Of course. So organizations have an interest moving security systems to the cloud. So that's what we heard from Uber, Barclays, and Starbucks right now. And some of the reasons they've mentioned were pretty inherent to SaaS solutions, uptime, availability, hyperscaling, meeting their needs, right? But they've also mentioned a desire to have access to that video more rapidly and more easily, right? To do more with it, right? Daniel has touched on the importance of cybersecurity, maintenance, and patching of some servers. And Joel has mentioned briefly some of the costs, benefits that a SaaS solution can bring them, right? And it brings me to the second question, which will be more centered around financials. So, Joel, let's start with you. Financially, why did migrating to the cloud make sense? And what are some of the variables that you took into consideration when you looked at a cloud-based solution?
So it's very quick to see from a fixed cost-based perspective that it's very easy to project what my annual spend is going to be with this. So one, it's very easy for me to look at this and go, I know how much it's going to cost me in the long run. Specifically, when we start breaking down the on-prem solutions, most people look at the initial cost of the video recorder, maybe camera licenses, things of this nature. But then when you start looking at reoccurring software support agreements, reoccurring cost associated with those camera licenses, and then more specifically, the reoccurring cost of deprecating hardware in this area. What we found was if by following the company's IT deprecation policy, we were having to go through and have a large spend every 4 to 5 years for every single one of these sites, which meant that we were continuously spending more and more and more. And over a 10-year period, the cost of on-site hardware, the maintenance, the electricity to support that skyrocketed very, very quickly. And it was very clear that the fixed cost perspective of the Stratocast cameras was very cheaper in the long run versus deprecating hardware, relicensing boxes, because at the end of the day, those machines fail. Those rotational drives, have a lifespan. So in turn, it actually gives us a higher level of reliability and dependability.
And maybe Tragan, maybe you can chime in. Starbucks obviously is a large organization. So how is that similar or different for your organization?
Yeah, I think a lot of Joel's points are very similar for us. When we start looking at the hardware cost and reoccurring maintenance of that hardware, I think that there's definitely a cost element there that we have to take into account. But I think if it was just that, we wouldn't necessarily establish a clear ROI by moving to the cloud. I think one of the things that we found through our cross-functional working groups is that there are other elements that we had to take into account to make it make sense. And those things, for example, are even infrastructure costs. The cost of operating a network that can support the amount of bandwidth required for transporting video, or, I think something that we forget about at times is we move servers to a virtual environment and we magically think that they're free. But the reality is there's a cost to operating those environments in our data centers, whether they're physical or virtual. And so when we start to take into account the initial capital expense, the ongoing repair and maintenance of repairing disk drives for the most part, as well as being a large consumer of data on our VPN backhauls and having to manage those through servers, those elements really come together to paint a pretty good picture about why there's a benefit in moving to a SaaS environment.
And Daniel, maybe you can chime in too. I heard, I'm going to segue on what Tragan has said regarding data center footprint. And I think that was part of the story I heard from Barclays when they decided to go to a cloud-based solution.
From a security perspective, yes, it was something that we have considered, significantly. And primarily it's around getting value out of the data that we harness. And I guess we'll touch base on this later during the conversation, but it has been mentioned around analytics and being able to analyze the data that has been captured. But I think as well from a data privacy perspective, for us to extract video footage from any of our retail spaces and then be able to do a trail of ownership of the data and up to a point of destruction, if we have that centrally and we can tap into that centrally and share it with the relevant parties that have access to it or require access to it, it's easier for us to manage from a centralized location in cloud where we have control over it. So I think that on top of everything that was currently mentioned, that was one of the drivers for us as well.
Okay. Going back to you, Joel, you did a fairly long expose of pretty much all the costs that are involved of running hardware and everything. But are there any hidden costs that people tend to forget when looking at a cloud-based solution?
Yeah, I think if you look at the labor that you spend procuring the equipment through your integrator, if you look at the time that it takes to transport that equipment, to set up that equipment in its final location,
I think we lost audio. Anyways, I lost audio. I don't know if the others have lost audio. So I see people nodding. So I'll ask Tragan and then to answer that question. Do you have any hidden costs on your side that you've noticed?
So in regards to hidden costs related to going to the cloud, that we haven't actually come across too much. I think one thing that you don't want to forget about, though, is there still is investment in bringing those systems up. So it's not that the installation of hardware costs goes away or anything like that. You still have to account for those things in your model because you still have to place cameras. You still have to get them connected and those types of things. But from a hidden cost perspective, I don't think that we've really seen anything so far that would indicate that there's something hidden that we have to worry about. It just comes more down to planning. We've operated in a very capital expense oriented environment for a while, and shifting that to an operational expense is different. And we need to make sure that we think about those types of things and the impact to the overall business when we're changing like these types of things.
Mm-hmm. So essentially, when we're speaking about cost, the conversation takes two folds here. So first, we have, of course, the upfront cost of purchasing and installing physical security infrastructure. And then we have a secondary, the long-term cost of actually updating and maintaining that physical infrastructure, which is often continuous. So that can include variables like I think Joel was mentioning, labor costs as well as logistics costs for mobilizing your staff to go to a certain isolated location to replace servers or replace drives. You have to also take into account the manpower needed to make sure that the systems are up to date, running appropriately, and in compliance with IT requirements as well. And in retail in particular, what we often hear from end users, so whether that's retail stores or retail branches, space is an important factor, right? Within a store, it's quite difficult to reserve a particular area of space in the back of the store or a back of a branch that's dedicated entirely to IT equipment and IT servers. And doing so would just, spiral your costs out of control as well. So now I think that we have a better understanding of the challenges that brought you guys onto this journey, as well as the financial considerations and the conversations that took place. Can you give us a little more information on why you selected Stratacast? So I'm sure you looked at different options and alternatives in the market from different vendors, but what was it about Stratacast that made you think that this was the right fit for your organization? So, Tragan, I'm going to restart the conversation with you here.
Yeah, and keep in mind we're still relatively new in what our Stratacast deployment looks like. For us, we have a fairly large security center system today. So we support security center across 10,000 locations and over 50,000 cameras. And so when we start introducing new systems, it can create some complexity for users that is really hard to get past. And so one of the benefits for us that we see is that we can potentially integrate this into our existing platforms to make it a very seamless experience for the user base, where they won't necessarily know if it's an on-prem solution versus a cloud solution. And so for us, that's a key element to make sure that we can provide a service level that is really easy for our users to adapt to while increasing reliability. And so I think that another item for us that's also important as we looked at cloud solutions was policy-based management of the devices, right? So where we can set across our entire camera base what we want things like retention periods to be and things like that. And, the tool gave us the capability to do that. And so I think a couple of those things together are definitely some of the drivers, but a key thing is integration with our existing platform to reduce complexity for our users.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And how is the situation for Uber for you, Joel?
Very much the same way. At the end of the day, it's our job as security practitioners to deliver technology that can be effectively used by our operations teams. And with Stratocast fitting directly into the security center environment that we're already building out, it made a lot of sense from the end user perspective. We looked at other technologies that had cloud-hosted solutions or SaaS offerings, as well as on-prem. And what we found was the way the two products are integrated within Genetech, the end user experience was leaps and bounds beyond some of the other companies that we had looked at. Additionally, I have experience with Genetech at one of my former companies where working with you guys to deploy.
I think the audio cut off here for a little bit as well, but I'll go to Daniel in that case. So Daniel, at Barclays Bank, again, a large enterprise with a global footprint, how was the situation at Barclays when it came to selecting Stratocast? Why did you think that was the proper fit for you guys?
So for us, any product that we select, or whether it's a hardware or a software product, it goes through extreme rigorous testing, pen testing processes. As you can imagine, in an environment as ours, security is key, particularly when it comes to cybersecurity. So we had selected a number of products, and then we ran tests through them, and we exposed vulnerabilities and then remediations. And I think what that decided for us was, apart from all the kind of key features that the two guys mentioned, was that we were able to work directly with Genetech to remediate the vulnerabilities that we've identified. And they were not critical vulnerabilities. They were minor tweaks that needed adjusting to be able to function in our space, to allow for our firewalls and to allow for our security measures to be implemented to its full capacity, but at the same time for the product to be able to function to its key performance. At the back of that, we didn't look at a product that we could take off the shelf and just unbox it and introduce to it. We were looking at something that could align to our integration with our legacy platform, and it's not necessarily just physical security systems that we were looking at integration into. We were looking at other platforms that analyze data and share data across different functioning areas. So it was definitely driven, by security perspective, both from cyber and from a physical and logical.
And Joel, maybe you would like to finish your answer. You didn't get to finish.
Yeah, so I think at the end of the day, it's one, around what can we deliver to our end users. Two, can we ensure that what we're transmitting and what we're sending is fully encrypted? And three, do we trust the company that we're partnering with to work with us to deploy and support technology? And I think my experience with Genetech has been really great in the past, and that was one of the determining factors as well, is my trust and belief in the company to continue pushing IT technologies, best practices, and security.
And let's touch on that a little bit more, Joel, because that's very interesting. Trust in the company in which you're dealing with, and in this specific case with Genetech, what are some? From a technology standpoint, pushing the boundaries and everything is one thing, but what are things that make you trust a company in which you're dealing with, especially in the SaaS model like this, software as a service? There's a lot of there's a lot of trust to be involved because you're transferring a lot of ownership back to the manufacturer, right? So what are things or key points for you to establish that trust?
So one of the things that we did is, as we started looking at Stratocast and more widely deploying it, we partnered with our information security team to go through and start looking at video streams, looking at the traffic that we were egressing from our site, and looking at the underlying technology stack that Genetech is using and the way they're storing our data. Through this process, I've gone through with other manufacturers, and our information security team has been able to find vulnerability after vulnerability after vulnerability, and in some instances the manufacturer was less than excited to fix them, and it became a chore. With Genetech, we ran through this exercise, found absolutely no vulnerabilities, found no items that needed to be resolved, found nothing that our information security team was concerned about. And so for me, knowing that, one, that I can partner with the red team in our company to go through, look at these products, but then also for you guys to come back with such a clean bill of health was definitely one aspect. The other side is your guys' track record of constantly pushing out new concepts, new technology, or leveraging existing IT technology in place with physical security. Over and over again, I'm constantly amazed by some of the things that we take for granted in IT, say certificate-based authentication or encryption. Like, other people aren't doing it, and it's just part of your guys' DNA. And, looking at that as one micro example gives me a high level of confidence that you guys will continue evolving and pushing this product.
And I'm just going to finish up with you, Daniel, because I know that the cybersecurity aspect is very important to you. I wanted to give you an opportunity to add on top of that because I think you have very rigorous standards, and Barclays, obviously being in the financial sector, cannot allow for that many failings from a trusted partner.
Yes, most certainly. And I think to expand on the previous answer, it was also for us key that moving forward and bringing a new product into our space, we bridged the gap between ourselves as an organization and the manufacturer, rather than going and having dependencies on a in-between integrator that was delivering a product, a solution into our space that met our requirements. And I think quite a key factor in this scenario was that as we were going through the testing and as we were remediating and as we were introducing this into our own environment, having the strict requirements and required adjustments to be made, it was a direct communication between the Genetec team and our team. And we always stated as one of the key deciding factors was that we wanted to make sure that as part of this product, we're also getting a service as a support service and a support engineering skill set that understands on a very high level a technical genre and a technical specifications and demands that we have. So it was very welcoming. It was a very good experience for us, being able to reach out to someone on the other side to answer those questions in a very quick manner and to be able to come up with solutions that met our requirements. Just to put that into a kind of a clear concept, it wasn't just a requirement from a physical security or a cybersecurity team. This was as well requirements that came from our architecturals and our networks requirements, our firewall guys. So it was quite a lot of stakeholders that had different sets of rules, sets of requirements, different sets of I would say adjustments that needed to be made to the product, which it took some time to get to, but it was always good to have a two-way conversation and always someone to be able to support us as we went through this journey. So that was a key thing for us as well.
Thank you. So I'm just going to wrap up this section very quickly. So what I'm hearing is that the decision was not entirely about Stratocast. Using the entire Genetech ecosystem was what was considered. Having that single pane of glass, allowing them to standardize across multiple sites was crucial in the decision. By having that enterprise class software, such as Security Center, it allowed them to unify their security system, but also maintain a cyber secure stance and limit local hardware footprint. Provided them obviously with ease of agility and deployment, but more specifically, it's the true partnership that won them over, that sealed the deal. So let's go a little bit more now in the nitty and gritty of the purchase journey, maybe some of the pain points or the roadblocks that you guys ever encountered. I'm going to start with you, Daniel. Obviously, you've mentioned different stakeholders and everything, cybersecurity. So what were some of the pain points that you've had, and how did you overcome them to go through the purchasing journey?
As I mentioned, it's bringing a product into our space that adds value, not only from a physical security perspective, but to other stakeholders, which, for companies that are planning our campus sites or our retail sites, and making sure that the data that is being captured from this product can enhance the decision making, required a lot more involvement for the decision makers from different departments. So I thought, ticking all the boxes from a security perspective and making sure that it's the best value, being able to identify when we're going to see the return on the value, having this great relationship with the manufacturer and being able to work with us directly. I guess the challenges that we were facing was around bringing the product in a way that will cause as little disruption to our legacy as possible while we migrate to our new environment. And that kind of required careful planning, I would say, in the beginning, because we didn't want to switch things on and not have anything to be able to cover our space. So it had to be working in a live environment. And at the same time, also looking ahead of, particularly from a global perspective, which features we could kind of switch on in which region to be compliant to local legislations, with particularly that we were looking at storing the information cross borders. So for us, it was making sure that we understand the impact to the business by bringing this product into our house and having the right people involved in the discussions early enough to sign off on the different functions or the different kind of requirements before we went live with the product. So I think that was the biggest challenge in the beginning.
And Tragan, I think you've come across some similar challenges, especially when we are talking about getting people involved and everything. So maybe you can chime in on your experience, some of the roadblocks that you've encountered.
Yeah, I think with any purchase, right, the things that are most challenging are also probably most beneficial to the process, right? So when you start engaging cross-functional teams to get to a point where you can make a decision, you're always going to have different opinions and different ideas of what good looks like at the end. And so that can always be tricky to manage, right? And I think that at least what I've learned over the years is that sometimes you have to kind of step back from that, really kind of focus on what the requirements are, and allow the data kind of point you in the right direction. I think generally if you do that, you'll end up with an outcome that everybody can support. But along the way, it can be tricky. And so I think that establishing clear requirements, clear desired outcomes is definitely important to achieve good results. But it does add a lot of complication because everybody will want to have input. And the reality is that can actually be very important at the end of the day if you really want to gain alignment across the organization to do something.
And Joel, maybe you can chime in on your experience in the purchasing process. So what were some of the roadblocks that you faced, and how did you overcome them?
I think one of the initial roadblocks may have been cost. Is when you sit down and you look at a reoccurring annual cost per camera versus what most people would consider the one-time cost, or without taking into consideration the implications and the downstream costs of on-prem system. But once we sat down and started actually breaking out the cost and showing what the actual life cycle cost was, not just installation, that conversation quickly dwindled. And it got to a point where it was very cost effective for us to deploy these solutions for very short-term sites as well as long-term. I think the other aspect, and Tregan really hit the nail on the head with this, is when you're working in a cross-functional environment where you have key stakeholders that each have their own priorities and things that they're trying to accomplish. It's important to make sure that you're building out the right team of people to come in. Whereas if you forget to include your corporate network team for bandwidth utilization and calculations, that's, you're setting yourself up for failure in the future. Or looking at the information security aspect and getting your teams to sign off on the technology, as well as whitelist or open up ACLs that are needed to egress from actual corporate locations. Making sure you're setting the stage up front with clearly defined requirements and expectations, and really tracking those outcomes to make sure that not only are they meeting your requirements, but then all of the key stakeholders' requirements as well. I've found by doing that to have the best and the greatest outcome by having everyone on the same page.
And quickly, Daniel, how does a SaaS provider such as Genetech help you alleviate some of the roadblocks that you may encounter?
I think, once again, it goes down to having the direct relationship, particularly with a support that can provide the same level of, I would say, readiness globally. We put that into test. We had a number of scenarios where we required a quick response, and even to a point where we needed someone on the ground while we were doing a setup in London, where we had a couple of blokes fly out from Canada and support us for a week, getting this feature and function embedded into our sites. So I guess it's it's not necessarily putting everything to a test, but having that comfort, having that support ready when it comes to kind of rolling it out. And as I said, we've got a global footprint, and we face challenges, differently out in the Middle East, differently in the US. But having a central team, having someone that we can go to that will guarantee us that same level of support, that same level of skills and knowledge is definitely helpful for us, which makes our job a lot easier, because when we plan our timelines for projects, when we look at we know that if we need someone, we can definitely get that from you guys in Genetech.
All right, Fab, I think that's pretty much all the questions that we had in mind right now. So maybe we can start looking at the audience questions and see what we can do on that side of things.
Yeah, perfect. So let's just quickly summarize here for the audience, because there was a lot of interesting things and interesting points that were brought up. So very quick, high level. In terms of roadblocks and pain points, a lot of them oftentimes are internal to an organization, and they do vary from one organization to another. So it can be, for example, a set of internal stringent requirements that just simply need to be met. It could be changing business priorities as well. And as Tregan mentioned, dealing with different stakeholders and making sure that you have the right stakeholders at the very beginning of the decision journey. And as Joel mentioned, to properly understand their requirements and what their needs are. So you don't just start and then suddenly stop and have to step 5 steps back, right? You already had that right cross-functional team with you from the very beginning. On top of that, I think Tregan mentioned in a really clear way that you should not lose sight of what the problem is. Although you have different stakeholders, different opinions, and everyone might want something different, keep in mind what that main problem is and what the requirements are in order to solve that problem, so not to lose sight of that. And a super important factor that was brought up with this question and the last question as well was the concept of partnership, or true partnership. So it's not simply about buying a product and dealing with this product, but it's more about how that product or how the vendor will grow with me as an organization as my business needs change and evolves over time, whether it grows or doesn't. So that was another point that was really well emphasized by Daniel as well as by Trigan and Joel. So thank you guys so much for that. And that was actually all of the questions that Oktay and I have prepared. And now we would really love to open up the virtual floor to the audience and get some questions going. So by the way, if you haven't submitted a question yet, it's not too late. Go ahead and submit your question to our panelists and we'll do our best to get to it at the very end.
So I've got a first question.
Yes.
I'll take the first question I'm seeing right here. So this is an interesting question because you guys all have some sort of distributed sites. But what about large systems with locations of 100+ cameras? Do you guys still recommend a Stratocast type of installation? Does it still make sense, or would you recommend something more on-premise? So I'm going to direct that question towards you, Joel, since I think you've got a mix of both, or in the process of doing a mix of both.
Yeah, so we're currently building out a large-scale corporate office in San Francisco right now, where we're looking at 500+ cameras. We've decided to proceed with cloud storage with the SaaS offering of Stratocast for a large majority of these cameras. I think as you start looking at larger sites that have longer lifespans, the attractiveness of the SaaS starts to diminish a little bit. But I think at the end of the day, the administrative overhead that you're no longer having to manage still makes it worth it from my side. We do have some on-prem servers that we're incorporating to allow us to record video for either really, really, really high resolution cameras that don't make sense to stream to the cloud right now, or other devices that are unable to stream directly to the Stratocast cloud where we do want video or audio recording, potentially such as intercoms. I think as this technology continues to mature and we can push higher res, higher frame rate or bit rate cameras into the cloud, that's definitely an approach we're going to look at going, as well as the incorporation or the cloud readiness of other devices. We will look at that and probably pivot at that point when some of those other technologies are available.
Yeah, I may add on to that a little bit, and I totally agree. I think one thing you have to look at is the capability that you have in the location to be able to support that amount of traffic. And I think a lot of companies are fortunate now to have a lot of additional access to bandwidth. I think it becomes a very attractive model to remove the support of the hardware required to run cameras on a location. And so I think that at some point we'll look to transition even larger facilities over to the cloud just because it makes more sense as things continue to develop.
Yeah, I think that's a key one that you call out, that Trigan, is from our perspective when we're looking at the planning and the transition, it was understanding when you actually start seeing the benefits of the rollout, the change, and it has to be a realistic timeline of when will that all function to what you actually want to get, the value you want to get out of the systems. So it's understanding that roadmap of the trajectory of when you're going to start seeing the value of changing hardware into a cloud-based solution. And in quite a few of our instances, it wasn't just a simple swap over. We actually did need to invest in the infrastructure to make sure that the bandwidth was sufficient enough to be able to change from on-prem into the cloud. So it's having a look and analysis of the footprint and understanding the benefits and when those benefits will be had versus the costs that are that you have available, and will you be able to support the project through the duration of the life cycle before you get to the end goal.
So I have another question here that's very interesting. It's a very long question, but in essence, if I recap it, it says pretty much that most of the systems we use today are heavily dependent on IT. So how do you bridge the gap between the two departments, being physical security and IT? since those systems are very dependent on IT. Tragan, maybe we can start with you if you could answer that question. And what do you see the direction of the industry moving in the future?
Yeah, I don't know if there's going to be a one-size-fits-all answer to that. I think if I go back, I guess nearly 10 years ago now, to when I started even moving our systems to network camera systems, I will say our partnership with technology at the time was not strong, right? And what we found early on is that we, in the security field, we're not making a compelling case for the technology teams to be a part of our journey. And so we tended to do things on our own, right? And, at that time, we really tried to change that, where we partnered strongly with technology, because our systems do rely heavily on technology, right? And the infrastructure that supports that technology within our workplace. And so we really had to just start speaking the language. I don't think that we have to move resources from one department or another to be successful. I think what we have to do is speak a common language and be inclusive of each other in the process of product selection, and make sure that we are, I guess, dotting all our I's and crossing the T's as we are making these changes. So I don't think that every company has to do it the same. I think there are facilities teams that can deliver security solutions that rely on technology and do it in partnership and do it well. Sometimes it's cleaner to have it all within a technology department. Sometimes it's cleaner to have technology experts within a security department. It really depends on the organizational needs. But I think the moral of the story for me is to make sure that you're partnering with all of the different resources that you need to make sure that you're delivering a result that gets you the outcome that you look for.
I see a lot of heads nodding. Go ahead, Fab.
Yeah. That's perfect. So we actually got an interesting question here on the concept of cybersecurity of the cloud. Myth or not? So what do you guys think about the concept of cybersecurity in the cloud? So it's a wide question, but I'll let you guys interpret it how you will.
I'll jump in really quick. I think cybersecurity in the cloud is as secure or more secure than anything on-prem. I think it all depends on your own processes and how you manage those things. I think through cloud surveillance systems, you can develop a lot more automated tools to enhance the security of your security systems. And so there's a benefit there. But I hope that we are now past the idea that cloud is less secure than on-prem, because I think that there's been a lot of data over the years that even air-gapped systems aren't necessarily secure. So that's kind of my thought.
Yeah, completely agreed. I think if we look at Uber as a company, we've decided to take a cloud-first strategy for many of our IT infrastructure products. And even as a company, all of our client-facing services are all hosted in someone's cloud somewhere. At the end of the day, it's all about the way the technology is implemented correctly or incorrectly, and the right company to partner with. I think if you look at the way Genetech is enabling the security and encrypting the data that we're pushing out to the cloud, to their SaaS offering, it's in a very secure and reliable method. And I think that's the main part, is you have to look at who you're dealing with, how their implementation is deployed. And, just like the last question, which was, how do we partner with internal key stakeholders or IT departments, bring them in. If you have a team of information security engineers, this could be a really good opportunity for you to spark that conversation with them. Show them, I think there's a concept within the IT industry that security is behind the times, and for the most part we are. But by bringing them in to look at these products and these technologies to help provide context and insight and feedback, not only are you helping to improve your program and your company's deployment, but you're also using this opportunity to build relationships with key stakeholders that can be very beneficial in the future.
Absolutely.
Yeah, sorry, Fabian, from our perspective, it's going through the initial step of actually testing the environment and giving those assurances and testing those assurances that it is as safe as we require it to be. And in a financial sector, it's not taken lightly. And I think to Tregan's point, it's understanding who it is that you're dealing with, the reputation that they have, the due diligence that has been kind of delivered to give those assurances that you are working with the right partner, you are working with the right product, and you are as safe as you can be.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So continuing on that, I think final question here. Can you guys give us briefly a few words of advice that you would provide someone who is perhaps at the very beginning of the same journey that you guys went towards the cloud? So Joel, maybe let's start with you here.
At the beginning of your journey, it's going to be challenging, especially if you're not a company or a person that has inherently worked with cloud-based solutions. There's this comfort in what we've been doing in this industry for the last 20 years. On-prem technology, isolated VLANs, air-gapped networks. People find comfort in what they've been doing and what they know works. But at the end of the day, everything is transitioning to a cloud-based model. And by looking at this technology, by validating that it meets your security policy requirements, by deploying it, you have the potential to start future opportunities for us, like removing the requirement of corporate network infrastructure. As Tregan mentioned, the ability to start looking at analytics that are running in the cloud. There's a lot of stuff that we can be doing, and each of your companies will have dedicated or different use cases. What are you trying to accomplish? Are you lowering administrative overhead? Are you lowering corporate network requirements from actual on-prem hardware? What are you trying to do? Test it, validate it, make sure that it works, that it meets your company's policies. And if it works, then ship it. At the end of the day, we're all responsible for trying to find not only how do we improve what we're doing now, but how do we deploy a product that supports the company long term? What are all the things that we don't know that we need to do? Start paying attention to them, start thinking about them, make a list, and then take that list back to Genetec and say, hey, this is some of the stuff we want to do. Just for me on my own, doing so, I've had some amazing solutions come back that I would have never thought about. Just take the time, start the process.
Very well said. And what about you, Tregan?
Yeah, so I mean, I'd echo a lot of Joel's thoughts. I think one of the things that we forget to do sometimes is really take stock of what it is we need a system to do, right? And I think that sometimes people get sucked into all of the new gadgets and features that are out there, and we don't really kind of step back and define what are the requirements of this thing that we need to deploy and work towards achieving those. And I think that I've been surprised over the years when I kind of step back and let the requirements speak for themselves, the results that you get. I wouldn't have expected we'd have been in a place that we are today with the systems that we have. And so take stock, determine what the requirements are as a starting point, and then work to find solutions that meet the requirements. And if you don't do that, it is really hard to be successful at the end of your project.
And for you, Daniel, would you have a few final words of advice for our audience?
Yes, most certainly. I can definitely second Tregan's kind of advice following the requirements. And from our personal journey, from my personal perspective, it was definitely understanding them earlier. It adds value to who you need to get engaged in this process, because at the end of the day, you are building a business case to secure funding to be able to purchase this and run it through the journey of deployment. So the early that is understood, and the earlier you understand what's the value you're going to be getting, and when that value is going to actually start playing through to the back to your business, the earlier it is going to be to get the sign-offs, to get the funding, and to be able to introduce this technology into your space. If it's just a buzzword and you want to do it, and you can afford to do it, then great. But even from that perspective, you're going to have challenges along the route because if you're not understanding what it's meeting, what's the objectives, then it's really pointless.
Mm-hmm. So thank you guys, and ladies and gentlemen, that is a wrap for us. We hope you got a better understanding of the SaaS market as well as the end users who make up this market. So today we really got a window into the world of cloud-first organizations and how they go about their buying journey, some of the challenges that they face that led them to this journey, as well as some financial considerations along with pain points and roadblocks, and how to identify them and lift them properly. So in Tragan's case, we saw the challenge of scale, of hardware failure, of inventory. For Joel at Uber, a hyper-growth company, there was the particular need of tearing up or tearing down locations quite fast and quite easily as well. And for Daniel at Barclays, we saw the challenge of disparate sites, how to own it, how to manage it, and how to stay on top of it, which was actually a theme shared amongst all three panelists today.
So some of the deciding factors were not always associated costs such as infrastructure costs, maintenance, are
I think we're losing Oktay.
Yeah. I think we just lost Oktay, but I can quickly summarize on this one. So as he was saying, some of the deciding factors are not always associated with costs such as infrastructure costs or maintenance. I believe he was saying there are other hidden costs that our panelists went through. Our panelists have mentioned, the importance of having a true partnership with a SaaS provider that will provide intangible benefits, such as offering flexibility and agility to their business. It's not necessarily about what the product can do today, but choosing one that can grow with them in terms of features and functionalities based on their changing needs in an ever-changing world. So I'd like to give a loud virtual round of applause to our wonderful panelists, Joel, Tragan, and Daniel. Thank you guys so much for taking the time out of your day to join us today and share your story with everyone. I'm sure it was extremely insightful for our audience and for us as well. And it is truly appreciated, of course.
Thank you very much. I hope you guys are hearing me now, but thank you very much. By the way, this session was recorded and will be available on demand. I invite you to take some time to go attend other sessions over the next 2 days. There's a lot of information that's going to be shared, whether it be product, trends, or anything. If you want to know more, if you want to engage into one-on-one conversations, I invite you also to visit our virtual booth or reach out to stratocastcommercial@genetech.com. It was a great time. I hope you enjoy ConnectDX.